Good morning and welcome to Travels with Monkey Boy. We are continuing our journey from spring of 1999, traveling to Scotland. This is day 3 of the journey. We had to set the alarm clocks this morning because we wanted none of the lollygagging that went on in day 2. Well, this was Sunday and most of the country was very religious and thus took the day off. I knew through careful planning that the car rental company at the airport was open at 8 a.m. So we didn't want to miss one possible minute of vacation fun that we had. So we decided that we must be the first customers in line at the car rental company. That meant being there by 7:45. Since it was a half an hour taxi ride to the airport, and since we had to check out of the room, we arranged to have breakfast for us at 6:30. The innkeeper, hinting that we were crazy, said that would be fine, but he wouldn't get up to serve it, and said that he would just keep some bread, cereal, milk, and fruit in the breakfast room for us when we woke up. The marvelous thing about Scotland is that you don't really have to refrigerate anything. He left the window open in the breakfast area, and we chipped off the top layer of ice on the milk pitcher and had a delicious breakfast. Of course, we were the first ones in line at the airport car rental place because, well, frankly, only crazy people get up on Sunday morning at 8 a.m. to rent a car. And with this being the low season for crazy people, we got our red Ford and were on the road by 8:30 a.m. According to the schedule, Stirling Castle didn't open until 9, and with it being only about 20 minutes to get to Stirling Castle, that gave us 10 minutes of free or slack time in the schedule. Of course, I had prepared for this and I had a slack time schedule with secondary castles and points of interest to visit. So we drove to the Firth of Forth. Note, Firth is like a bay or inland. So in Scotland, the football team would be the Green Firth Packers. And we took the scenic route. Okay, the weird thing about scenic route in Scotland is that on a direct route, you drive on 6-lane highways through lush green countryside with cloud-like sheep floating through the fields and accentuated with the occasional river or castle. On the scenic route, you're on a curvy, poorly paved 2-lane road from which you drive through lush green countryside with cloud-like sheep floating through the fields and accentuated with the occasional river or castle. Apparently, scenic in Scottish means car sick. Anyway, on the Firth, we noticed a sign saying something to the effect of "Castle ahead 2 kilometers." Imagine our thrill being on the road in Scotland for less than 10 minutes and being able to see our first castle. It was a medieval looking thing sitting on this body of water. It wasn't open, but it did provide us with the chance to get out of the car into the freezing, damp, cold air in order to touch an actual stone house. We took a picture and raced back into the car. Soon back onto the scenic route, we almost immediately passed a sign saying, "Castle ahead 2 kilometers." But as our time was now tight, we raced on by. The city of Stirling was roughly 5 castle ahead 2 kilometers signs away, and we arrived only slightly behind schedule. Stirling is famous for being the epicenter for the War of Scottish Independence. Okay, famous may be a stretch. And in fact, to say that any American had ever heard of the 700-year-old battles between the northern third of this small Atlantic island trying to be independent from the southern two-thirds is a stretch. But then the great historian Mel Gibson showed us his butt in the movie Braveheart, and now there is a subclassification of people that pretend they care about William Wallace, Robert the Bruce, and the Battle of Bannockburn. We didn't really care, but had heard that there was a pretty cool castle here, so we had to stop. And in fact, Stirling Castle is often called the sister castle of Edinburgh Castle. It sits up on the same sort of volcanic upcropping overlooking the city like Edinburgh Castle does. And it's made of stone and is cold and drafty. The primary difference we noticed in the two castles that while in Edinburgh we were cold while looking through the castle, in Stirling we were cold and wet. We were experiencing our first Scottish rainstorm. The rain forced us out from the beautiful castle grounds and into the Museum of Scottish Soldiers Wearing Dresses. Hey, I'm all for country having their cultural heritage, but let's face it, Scotland, It needs some serious real evaluation of their icons. The kilt, while unique, is just an embarrassment. The tartan plaids are just a tourist thing they made up about 100 years ago. No, really, I guess 1,000 years ago, each clan had its tartan, but then the custom died out. And when it was revived, there was no historical record of what the plaids were, so they just made a lot of them up. The bagpipe is a natural torture device, and the national food, haggis. Haggis, by definition, a traditional Scottish dish that consists of the heart, liver, and lungs of a sheep or calf, minced with suet, onions, oatmeal, and seasonings, boiled in the stomach of the animal that was killed. Interestingly, this is exactly what you would find under the ingredients in most American cans of dog food. Under these, until these people can develop a sensible tradition, I think we should take the responsibility away from them. And by the way, though haggis was offered in every restaurant that we went to, including McDonald's McHaggis burger, we proudly never ate it. As the rain fell harder and we had basically run out of things to see inside, we decided to go. We thought about going to see the Wallace Monument, a marvelous phallic-looking building we could see from the castle, but it wasn't really old, built in 1860. Even worse, it was a tribute to William Wallace, who had died 700 years ago, hanged, disemboweled, beheaded, and quartered, if you don't mind. And most of the history of him was A, completely made up by a 15th century romantic writer called Henry the Minstrel, according to Encyclopedia Britannica, and B, seen in Braveheart. So we passed. We also could have gone to the battlefield of Bannockburn or Stirling Bridge, but if we'd stopped at every little thing in Scotland, it would have taken us a week to see the country, so we forged on. I, of course, had a detailed map and directions. I mean, detailed. Remember, this is the time before Google Maps when you had to have had uh, actual physical maps and directions. So it would be something like location Stirling, follow left the A9 for half a kilometer, turn right onto the uh, to the A9 north by northeast, turn to the A84 after 1 kilometer, on and on and on. So I had it all written down because I have a innate sense of misdirection. I'm always lost. I cannot find myself. Google Maps was made for me. So anyway, we had the map set up from Stirling up to Invergary for our night's rest. I had painstakingly created the itinerary through a cross-reference of my Travel Europe CD-ROM, my National Geographic DVD, and my Encyclopedia Britannica DVD. I had every site of interest, every castle, every lake, loch, cow, and blade of grass chronicled. Of course, pulling out of Stirling Castle, we couldn't find the itinerary with all the notes, maps, charts, and mileage indicators. But we did have a rental car map with several of the country's major highways represented, my innate sense of direction, and a driving rainstorm. I had said all along that I did not want to go to Glasgow. Glasgow is the capital of Scotland. I figured Glasgow is like the Akron of Scotland, a big industrial city with plenty of urban sprawl and shopping malls to see. There was no reason to see Glasgow, and the only possible way we would end up in Glasgow was to go south by southwest out of Stirling instead of north by northwest. Anyway, Glasgow did not disappoint. Sure, traffic was heavy by the time we got there Sunday early afternoon, and sure, it was raining, making the roads slippery and treacherous, even for a local that isn't lost, isn't driving an unfamiliar car, and isn't confused why the steering wheel is on the passenger side. But in spite of all the obstacles, we managed to see vast swaths of the city, up to and including downtown. In fact, we managed to go far enough downtown that the highway ended. Then we managed to end up on a city street in a neighborhood that gave us an idea of how poor people in Scotland really lived. Not the panicking sort, or the sort to stop and ask for directions. I told Jolene that we should just pick a direction to drive. If we ended up driving west, we'd run into the Atlantic Ocean after about half an hour, and then we could follow the coast up. If we went east, we'd end up back in Stirling, and we knew with a second chance at Stirling, we'd get it right. If we went south, we'd bump into Hadrian's Wall, a famous Roman edifice built 2,000 years ago to keep lost American tourists out of England. And north, we would be where we wanted to go. We spun the bottle and followed a road that got smaller and smaller as the city slums turned into countryside. Then we saw a sign for Loch Lomond. That being on our rental car map, we knew we were going in the right direction. Our rough guide of Ireland included one restaurant on the whole western shore of Loch Lomond, and since it was now nearly 2, we had to find it. In fact, the restaurant was easier to find than the loch. The rain was fairly strong, making it hard to see. We settled in for a lovely lunch and watched the rain pelt the high road, the rain pelt the low road, the rain fall in Scotland all over. For me and my family will never eat again on the bonny western shores of Loch Lomond. I wouldn't say we raced through lunch, but now we were seriously behind schedule. Today we were planning on staying in a castle, and frankly, what's the point in staying in a castle if you get there at midnight and have to leave again the first thing in the morning? Because, of course, we had a busy day the next day. The drive from here, though, was spectacular. We were now entering the Highlands, and the rain added an incredible element to it. The Scottish Highlands were surprising to me because, well, they were so high. These were legitimate mountains. Maybe not the same height as the Rockies, but from base to peak, every bit as impressive. In fact, the road was nestled in a little valley and it had huge peaks on either side of us. And because of the rain, there were 10,000 waterfalls flowing down the steep, treeless slopes. These waterfalls came down to the valley and merged with great rivers that offered stunning scenic overlooks. We even stopped a couple of times to gawk and snap quick pictures before our less than adequate rain gear was soaked. It was really stunning, possibly the highlight of our whole Scottish trip, but it's also hard to put in words. Besides, we were on a schedule and we had to push on. It was about 4 p.m. when we found Invergarry and the Glengarry Castle Hotel. By this point, our sore feet from the previous day had been replaced by our sore butts from today. Before we go any further, this place was not a castle. There are tens of thousands of castles in Scotland, but the Glengarry Castle Hotel was not one of them. Oh, it was impressive. A huge old industrialist's house built in the 1870s. The family had something like 11 children and each had their own private bedroom. 20 years ago, the descendants turned the family home into a bed and breakfast hotel to make ends meet. It was quite charming with lovely gardens, but not a castle. There was a castle on the grounds, and by the time we unpacked, we decided we had to see it to get our money's worth. We put on our meager rain gear and went for a hike along the lake loch through a forest path to the ruins of an old castle. There was no information on the castle other than the big signs around the metal fencing that said, "Warning, do not enter castle grounds." As one side of the ancient castle had already crashed down on the other, and the other side looked like it was held together by hope, we felt the sign unnecessary. We trudged back to the house minutes before we froze to death. Inside the house, we had a problem. Our coats and pants were soaked completely through. Fortunately, the kindly old woman that ran the house took us into the basement, the dungeon, to the room with the central heating system. It was about 125 degrees in the room, and so there was a fair chance that our clothes would be dry by morning. With a change into dry clothes, we went into the family room with the big roaring fire. We sat in big chairs around a small card table in front of a big picture window and sipped hot chocolate, listened to the rain falling outside, and we played a family game of Clue. For those of you interested, Frankie was Miss Scarlet, and as fate would have it, she was the murderer. It wasn't long before we had all figured out that she had done it, and poor Frankie spent the rest of the game being sucked from one room to the next as Alex, Jilreen, and I tried to figure out where she did it and with what. She was a good sport about it. I think she was flattered that she was the murderer, and I, of course, won. By the end of the game, we went back to the room and ordered room service. We didn't want to wait for the 4 p.m. formal haggis dinner, and we all crawled into bed and fell asleep before the realization of what an arduous trip this was began to form into anything like hate or bitterness. Okay, that's the story for today. Let me share with you the maps today. I think we haven't done maps in a while. And here we go. Okay, if you remember, we were here's Edinburgh Castle. If you remember, we were staying down about this area. Whoops. We took we took the walk to Edinburgh Castle. After Edinburgh Castle, our goal was to get to Hard Rock Cafe. If you could see, it's just a few blocks away, unless you go this way, and then this way, and then this way, and then come back and end up back here and end up at Hard Rock. So in the morning, we drove. Here is the Firth of Forth from Edinburgh. I suppose I should give you the full view of Scotland so you can remember. Here's England down here, Ireland over here, Iceland, we're going there soon. So we went first to the Firth of Forth, and then we drove over to Stirling. And then from Stirling, our goal was to drive to Invergary, and somehow we ended up at Glasgow. Here are the Scottish Islands. Like I said, get a chance. They're breathtakingly beautiful. Okay, that's all I got for today. Hope to see you again tomorrow. Bye.